Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for coming. You're all very welcome to what is the first ever, in fact, Department of Modern Languages research lecture. Thanks to our distinguished guest for coming and agreeing to speak to us today. It's a moment of celebration for us all, I think, in a way. I think it's really the first time for me that we've all come together as a department to celebrate the range of things that we do. There are a series of events throughout the years, 2 seminars in the second semester, and we'll be holding a round table later on in this semester. But really, this is the formal moment when we kind of inaugurate our research activities as a single department. And the first moment when we all come together to discuss our research. You're not here to listen to me, though, so I will pass on to Conrad, who will introduce today's speaker.
Hi, everybody. So, Silvio Torres-Saillant is by far, I would say, one of the most influential voices in Caribbean and U.S. Latino studies today. And the interesting thing is that his influence is not due simply to his level of productivity, and he is extremely prolific. But it is more, I would say, to do with the energy and the rigor, the integrity, and more than anything, an acute sense of justice which he brings to his analyses of the Caribbean and its diasporas. There is something about his scholarship which seeks out all the multiple hidden stories of the Caribbean. And he does it in a way by avoiding transparency, avoiding what is trendy, and in that way doggedly sticks to his objectives, and that's how I think he's managed to produce some of the most significant texts on the history of the Americas today. His articles are numerous, and in over 10 books which he has produced over the last decade, he has uncovered relentlessly the vitality of the Caribbean imagination, while at the same time attempting to dismantle the tenacious colonial apparatus which influences the production of ideas in the region. Before taking up his current position as Professor of English at Syracuse, Torres-Saillant taught and held fellowships in some of the most prestigious institutions in the United States and Latin America. His work has been pivotal in the development of Latino studies, and in particular U.S. Dominican studies in the United States and beyond. I think it would by no means be an exaggeration to say that Torres-Saillant's scholarship and his activism, which is also significant, have been responsible for creating numerous careers, for initiating a new discourse on race and Dominican blackness, and most importantly, for placing Dominican studies on the world stage. Not surprisingly, his career has been punctuated by the receipt of copious awards, including one of the highest honors that the Dominican Republic can award to its citizens. That is El Orden al Mérito de Duarte, Sánchez y Mejía. So Silvio, it goes without saying that it is with great enthusiasm and admiration that we welcome you to the University of Birmingham and invite you to deliver your lecture, Overcoming the Columbian Legacy Towards a Humane Cultural History. Silvio.
Thank you. And it is with great, deep gratitude that I have accepted to come, and it is with great humility that I appear before you this morning to try to engage you, this afternoon actually, to try to engage you in a conversation about the subject that we've agreed. I am very grateful to the department, chair, the leadership of the department, and to all of you for making this possible and for being here. I will try to use the time wisely. So I've asked Conrad to take the liberty to interrupt me mid-sentence, if need be, should I, go beyond my minutes, or at least give me a hint Now, tell me that in 2 minutes my time will be up, and I'll try to wrap it up. But you are in those situations that many of you may have found yourselves in, that you have everything to say, and you actually think you will be able to say it. It doesn't tend to work that way, does it? So I hope that the next I hope that the next iteration of this lecture series actually happens. I have a particular stake in it, in its happening, because if it doesn't, then I'll have to change the title, my way of identifying this presentation as the inaugural speaker. So I won't be able to say that I was the inaugural speaker if there is not a second or a third. So, and I want to have that when this is published. I want to have that at the bottom. So please make sure. On April 23rd, 2004, I formed part of a symposium entitled Cultural Encounters in the Caribbean, Cuba, Haiti, and Santo Domingo, along with Haitian scholar Maximilien Laroche of Université Laval, the late Martinican poet and critic Edouard Glissant, then at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and the Cuban scholar Roberto González Echeverría of Yale University. Organized by the French literature scholar Leo Schwartz and the Hispanist Mauro Filer at the Graduate Center, the symposium fostered a cogent conversation about the intersection of French and Spanish cultures as their projects of overseas expansion manifested themselves primarily in the Caribbean. Apart from the rewarding exchange with these notable colleagues during the public phase of the program, I remember with great interest an exchange I had later in that day at dinner with Professor González Echeverría, whom I apparently horrified when I shared my impression of José Enrique Rodó's classic essay, Ariel, as an eminently racist document. Though I sought to substantiate my claim by invoking textual evidence, like we are taught to do, such as the passage in which Rodó refers to the skull size of the thinking races, quote unquote, right? The Yale colleague could not stomach my appraisal, finding it una lectura tan burda, that is, a crude reading or one wanting in subtlety. Subsequently, during a seminar at the University of Cartagena, the young Afro-Colombian historian Javier Ortiz, to whom I recounted the eventful dinner conversation with the Yale colleague, offered consolation for the dismissal of my reading in a way that I found insightful. He said he did not see how one could avoid a crude reading of Rodó's formulations, given the blatant, in-your-face nature of the racism they convey. The problem over divergent appraisals of Rodó's essay emerged for me again in the context of the colloquium towards the new history of Latin American and Caribbean intellectuals, convened at Princeton University on April 12-14, 2007, by the estimable literary scholar Arcadio Díaz-Quiñones and the fine historian Jeremy Averman. A memorable gathering of academics mainly from Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Venezuela, the occasion confronted me again with the discomfort that people like me, who inhabit the profession as Caribbeanists, may produce in the chroniclers of the great Latin American tradition, given our tendency to address the question of race as a regulator of social relations in the hemisphere. During my presentation, I characterized Rodó's essay as, I quoting myself here, white supremacist, anti-Indian, and negrophobic, a virtually proto-Nazi text. Nazi, measuring noses, Rodó, skull size. Get the connection? In addition to drawing attention to the equally disturbing aspects of La Raza Cósmica by José Vasconcelos, whose notion of the fifth universal race that the Americas would produce revolves around the presumption of whiteness as the organizing principle and the, quote, voluntary extinction of the, quote, inferior races through a process of cordial amalgamation. I remember eliciting a measure of dissatisfaction with my choice of adjectives to characterize the ideologies of Rodó and Vasconcelos in the presence of notable colleagues from Latin America. I recall especially that the distinguished sociologist and historian of ideas, Sergio Miseli, of the Universidade de São Paulo, took exception to what struck him as uma exageração on my part. Instances such as my repartee with a Yale professor and the exchange with colleagues at Princeton have given me to understand that the objections to my ethno-political lexicon did not entail an utter denial of the veracity of the passages I had quoted, nor a downright refusal to recognize the racist implications of the ideas I had decried in the works of the renowned figures of Latin American literature and thought. My interlocutors had a problem primarily with my emphatic formulations and the extent to which I had chosen to privilege the racial question, perhaps to the detriment of various other facets of rich and multifaceted literary oeuvres and intellectual legacies. Except in instances of ideological adoration, scholars of Latin American letters do not typically refute charges of white supremacy launched against the likes of Rodó and Vasconcelos, or even the left-leaning thinker José Carlos Mariátegui. Rather, they seem to object fiercely to approaches that would center the racial question in the analysis of their effort, contending that racially minded critics make too much of the racial ideas of the pillars of the Latin American intellectual tradition. I am pointing here to the existence of an intellectual sensibility that finds it unsubtle and crude for literary scholars to stress the question of race when appraising the works of great writers, with the implication that the greater the emphasis on these social matters of inequality and injustice, the lesser the chance of attaining analytical sophistication. I find this intellectual sensibility more easily sustainable by scholars whose ancestors did not bear the brunt of the colonial transactions, centuries of violence and dispossession. I also see here a diplomacy of scholarly inquiry that compels me to conjecture about whether the reputation of an eminent humanist like Pedro Enriquez Ureña, recognized throughout the hemisphere as a builder of the Latin American canon, would have suffered had he engaged the question of race differently from the way he did. Born in the Dominican Republic in the last quarter of the 19th century, a time when the Christian West dictated the model of humanity that prevailed throughout the Western Hemisphere, Enriquez Ureña, phenotypically a mulatto, lacked access to discourses that challenged the tenets of white supremacy. Major works of Caribbean thought that set out to dismantle the logic of Negrophobia did exist during his times. The distinguished Haitian thinker Antonin Remand's treatise, De l'égalité des races humaines, had compellingly challenged the claims of Josepho Arthur de Gobineau's influential Essai sur l'inégalité des races humaines, a study that had argued emphatically for placing whites at the top and blacks at the bottom of the mental development of the species. Similarly, Feudacity, the polemical essay by the Trinidadian educator John Jacob Thomas, had debunked the views disseminated by the English historian James Anthony Froude, whose travelogue, The English and the West Indies, or the Bow of Ulysses, dismisses the possibility of any progress and civilization in the Caribbean with the blacks running around devoid of the supervision of their white masters. But the mere existence of these texts did not imply that the ideas they contained formed part of the scholarly conversation in fora that dealt with race relations. For the most part, the voices that advocated the equality of the races and contested the myth of superiority of one group over another, in spite of providing often very compelling arguments, scholarly rigor, and critical acumen, did not gain sufficient attention so as to contain the influence commanded by the champions of Negrophobia from Gobineau to Froude. As a result, it will not surprise anyone that Enriquez Ureña, the recipient of a classical European education, should show no sign of having read or known about the likes of Firmin or Thomas. One should also say that Enriquez Ureña did not have at hand the conceptual tools with which to validate the African component of his ancestry. Africa being a region of the world that Western thinkers had long placed outside the confines of thought, civilization, and even humanity. The influential German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Hegel's lectures on the philosophy of history, which categorically declares black Africans as existing outside the worthy narrative of humankind, had appeared in print posthumously in 1837. Enrique Sureña, aware of his own intellectual capacity, had taken it upon himself to chronicle in his works the glorious achievements of Hispanic culture in the Iberian Peninsula and the Americas. Given the pronounced Caucasian ideal of the literary and intellectual tradition he set out to champion, the Dominican humanist must have had occasion to ponder on his own racially differentiated condition vis-a-vis that tradition. In his seminal study of Hispanic Caribbean intellectuals, Sobre los Principios, Arcadio Díaz Quiñones devotes a memorable chapter to Enrique Sureña's biography from the perspective of an engagement with the tradition. In his private correspondence with friends, Enrique Sureña expressed dismay about several instances when he endured racial antipathy. But his encounters with Negrophobia at the personal level never seemed to inform his evocation of the great humanistic culture that Spain had brought to the hemisphere. He even went along with the pastoralists of mestizaje in embracing a view of race in Latin America as an identity defined primarily by the experience of a shared cultural heritage which supersedes any difference of ancestry or phenotype. Witness the epithet Día de la Raza to commemorate 12th of October 1492, the day when the world radically changed for the worse for Indo-Americans and Africans, auspicious as it was for Europeans. Enrique Sureña denied, for instance, that Dominican Spanish exhibited any trace of African influence, observing also that the blackness often attributed by foreign observers to the Dominican population resulted from a confusion caused by the country's proximity to Haiti. It appears that the renowned philologist needed to diminish Dominican society's connection to the African diaspora in the hemisphere in order better to diminish conceptually the traces of his own ancestral blackness. I do not feel prepared to speculate here on whether the mental dynamics involved in Enrique Sureña's rapport with blackness occurred at a conscious or an unconscious level. But the result appears to resemble the social location of the Iberian Marrano. The Jews who, following their conversion in the wake of their people's expulsion from Iberia in 1492, sought to conceal the newness of their Christian identity, lest their Jewish ancestry get them in trouble. I would conjecture that the Dominican scholar's decision to wear the skin of the Marrano enabled his unquestionably extraordinary talent to shine forth to the point of earning him vast recognition in the Republic of Latin American letters. He came to enjoy intellectual and scholarly authority in a disembodied realm of knowledge, even if at the social level he did not receive material reward commensurate with his prestige. Suffice it to say that he died working in Buenos Aires as a high school teacher, never receiving the reward of holding a university professorship during his 20 years of residence in Argentina. Still, his ideas did not suffer a marginalization that condemned them to the thickest obscurity, as did those of Antonio Firmin and Jean-Jacob Thomas, a risk that he would have run had he sacrificed sophistication, subtlety, and analytical depth by engaging publicly the crude matter of the tradition's racism. As a scholar who came into the profession after the civil rights movement in the United States, the emergence of discourses of self-affirmation in the Antillean world, and the rise of indigenous resistance initiatives throughout Latin America, I came to inhabit the academic arena armed with paradigms that Enrique Sureña did not possess. I entered the field with a full awareness of intellectual legacies built around the defense of people's rights to their difference. As a result, an African-descended person from the Caribbean, I can easily draw a connection between the treatment I receive on the streets and the treatment accorded to black bodies or the bodies of knowledge produced by blacks on the scholarly page. Instead of finding it necessary to conceal myself ethno-racially on the page, I feel now empowered to go looking for race in the rendition of intellectual history offered by scholars. I think of race now as a highly suitable matter for abstract inquiry and analytical depth. There is indeed much insight to be derived from unearthing the racial relations that may lie buried in particular moments of civilization in the Americas. The Afro-Brazilian scholar and activist Manuel Raimundo Quirino noted that the achievements of white Brazilians in literature, science, education, and the arts often came about as a result of their families' prosperity, which freed them from time-consuming menial labor, enabling them to work at perfecting their craft or pursuing advanced studies and financing their training at the best European universities. Torino contends that in those instances where the prosperity came from the exploitation of enslaved black labor on the family's plantation, which was the majority of cases, the blacks that produced the profits that financed the achievements deserve a large part of the credit for building the country's civilization. In that respect, I would posit the unnamed blacks or Indians are behind many a major poem, the medical degrees, musical compositions, or social theories produced by white Latin Americans throughout the colonial transaction and its aftermath, or to figure in a chronicle of the region's intellectual history that wishes to overcome the Columbian legacy. And I hope I have a few moments to speak about what I mean by Columbian legacy. Let me rush to the next section, in which I beg your attention. It's a Chinese interlude, which I hope I'll be able to connect later. In January 2012, I made myself angry, as I often do, by listening to National Public Radio, a company that provides programs to be broadcast by radio stations throughout the United States, known by its acronym NPR. The organization has a reputation that construes it as progressive, and the conservative sector of the country's political establishment seem to concur in that at times they have attempted to prevail upon the congressional legislation to discontinue the public funds that the radio network receives. On closer inspection, however, it becomes clear that the country's political right object primarily to NPR's practice of giving voice to groups or individuals representing both sides of any story of import to liberals and conservatives. The network takes sides with neither, adhering to a strict policy of unbiased reporting. The company's commitment to that practice often results inevitably in their remaining neutral with respect to opinions, whether truthful or false. The organization satisfies itself with giving both sides of the story. Here's the truth, here's a lie, I won't tell you which. Your job to guess, yeah? Perhaps that commitment to neutrality instead of to public education, which would entail taking sides with enlightenment against disinformation, allows for the airing of programs such as The Secret Document That Transformed China, broadcast in January this year, led by journalists David Kesterbaum and Jacob Goldstein, and The Planet Money Show. Irksomely, the program set out to solve the mystery of the rise of China as a major player in the world's economy, a phenomenon that political elites in the United States and other parts of the Christian West have found difficult to comprehend. The Kestenbaum and Goldstein program revolves around the discovery of a secret document, basically a contract signed in 1978 by farmers in a small village called Xiaodang, conceived at the height of communism in China. 1978 apparently was the height of communism in China, which forbade personal property and required all villagers to work on the collective farm. The contract could have cost the co-signatories their lives. The journalists quote Yang Hongchang, a farmer from Xiaogang, who had partaken of the code stipulated in the secret deal. To explain the difference, Hongchang is quoted to explain what difference the contract made. Before the secret agreement, the farm workers lacked any special interest in their jobs, dragging themselves out into the field only when the village whistle blew, summoning the farmers to start the day's labor. Afterwards, they went on to the field of their own accord and stayed on their task until later than expected. Since nobody before owned anything, the government administering the collective production, distributing food equally to each family irrespective of how productive each had been on the field, farmers lacked incentive to work hard. People's indifference toward their work caused collective productivity to decline, leading to a shortfall in the availability of food. Village children went hungry. In 1978, after another terrible harvest, the farmers secretly decided to change the rules of the communist economy. Each family from then on would farm its own plot of land and keep a part of the harvest if they had a good yield. Cognizant of the danger they faced, the families agreed that if any of the farmers suffered incarceration or death, the others in the group would care for their children until age 18. Then the plotters set out to work, and everything changed. From that moment onward, the farmers began to compete secretly, everyone seeking to produce more than the next person. At the end of the season, the farmers could boast an enormous harvest, larger than they had achieved in the previous 4 years put together. Their huge success gave them away, however. Local officials discovering the conspiracy and causing the plotters to have to appear before Communist Party officials. White local Communist Party spokespersons abused Yang Hongchang verbally in their interrogations. However, the farmers suffered no injury. Luckily, by that time, important agents of change had found a way into the leadership of the modern of China, especially the leadership of the Communist Party, chiefly Deng Xiaoping, who would go on to create China's modern economy. The Chinese leaders ultimately decided to uphold the Xiaogang farmers as a model instead of punishing them. The government adopted the economic principles of the secret document and launched other economic reforms, causing the Chinese economy to grow like crazy, lifting some 500 million people out of poverty since 1978. The story of the Xiaogang farmers told by the NPR journalists, as we can see, demonstrates the virtues of capitalism, called in the piece modern economy, as compared with communism, and it construes the political leadership of China as somehow unaware of the nature of capitalism as an economic system. The government learns about capitalist competition and the profit motive from an experiment of some farmers from a village on East Anhui province in 1978. The article ends with a more ambiguous closing to the Xiaogang story as it relates specifically to the original farmers who signed the conspiratorial contract. While their entrepreneurship created a model for the rise of China in the world's economy, the tendency of the state to control individual initiatives remains a stumbling block to full-scale national development. Kestenbaum and Goldstein tell us that Yang Hongchang, who originally drafted the secret agreement of the Xiaogang farmers, has started a couple of businesses over the years, but the local Communist Party took them away once they became profitable. The NPR journalists learned from Hongchang that the new factories springing up around Xiaogang these days are largely empty, having created few jobs, despite reports by local officials to the effect that all is well in the village. The NPR story tells us that China owes the place it currently occupies among nations leading the world's economy to private enterprise and individuals' profit motive, while the avatars of communist dogma and entrenched repressive practices continue to turn against individuals such as Hongchang, to the inevitable detriment of the citizens insofar as the government continues to fail at creating jobs. The radio program reads like a manifesto for capitalist entrepreneurship and deregulation. Nor does it seem clear whether the journalists had occasion to realize the irony of extolling those economic precepts at the same time as the protest of young people associated with the Occupy Wall Street movement had spread throughout most of the national geography of the United States. The message of the young people at the time, in a nutshell, was simply that capitalism cannot deliver on its promise, that unbridled pursuit of wealth, spurned by individualist entrepreneurship and the profit motive, could not produce a healthy climate for social relations. The demonstrations had taken to the streets, compelled primarily by the national and then global disaster caused by the rapacity of individualist pursuit of wealth in the banking industry and other sectors linked to finance. It seemed bizarre for NPR to choose the midst of a global financial crisis that had left millions of people without jobs, homes, and self-respect due to the unregulated ambitions of capitalist entrepreneurs to extol the advancement that capitalist practices had brought to China, and to indict the remnants of the collectivizing ethos associated with communism. At the heart of the ill-timed NPR program, it seems to me, is the capitalist world's despair of the apparent need to explain the mystery of the global rise of a non-Western society. In the United States, for instance, one often hears concerns expressed by politicians over the extent to which China may have engaged in theft of Western intellectual property. The story of the secret documents signed by the farmers of Xiaodong comes in handy because it shows the Chinese cultivating the profit motive and individual entrepreneurship, an old idea, of course, as Kestenbaum and Goldstein note. In other words, emulating the core economic ethos of the capitalist West. It seems less easily conceivable to imagine China's rise as fueled by ingrown forces, talent, and potential. One can find the reticence, not only in one can find the reticence to recognize the Chinese as originators of civilization, not only in Western journalists and politicians, but also in the scholars. The historian Will Durant, who with his wife Ariel Durant dedicated much life to writing the 11 volumes of The Story of Civilization, had occasion to contemplate not only the sites and conditions of civilization in the past, but also the likelihood of its continuation in the future, and led by whom. In a single volume published by the Durants in 1968 as a summary of what history, the study of history can teach us, we learn, for instance, glancing backwards, about the 2,000 years from the Battle of Salamis, 480 BC, to the defeat of the Spanish Armada, 1588, when the northern and southern shores of the Mediterranean constituted the rival seats of the white man's ascendancy. Glancing forward, the historian contemplates the possibility of Asian supremacy. He wonders whether the course of civilization will, I quote, continue across the Pacific, exporting European and American industrial and commercial techniques to China as it had before to Japan. End of quote. The historian wonders whether, quote, Oriental fertility, working with the latest Occidental technology, will bring the decline of the West. The historical logic we see deployed here can only imagine Chinese or Asian potential for replacing the Europeans and Americans at the forefront of the affairs of the world in their fertility and their ability to receive Western knowledge. Yet one cannot help wondering what, in the historian's eyes, could prevent the Chinese from drawing on the resources of their own civilization to push themselves forward to the headship of human affairs. Did China not precede the nations of Europe in numerous accomplishments? Suffice it to mention the maritime developments that enabled Cheng Ho to sail to Africa, the Indian Ocean, and Persia between 405 and 1433. 1405 and 1433. By the beginning of the 15th century, Chinese rulers had attained the naval power subsequently displayed by the Portuguese and the Spanish when they spearheaded the colonial project that resulted in the domination of overseas peoples and the takeover of their lands. China simply did not seek to effectuate its advancement by means of the subjection of foreign people. The logic of domination that we inherit from the Columbian enterprise, meaning what we now have as the Columbian legacy, has so penetrated the thought patterns of students of history that an explanation seems required whenever looking at the past we encounter inter-ethnic or intercultural contacts that did not result in the domination of one people by the other. A historian of the voyage of Scandinavian Leif Erikson to the northern portion of the Western Hemisphere 500 years before Columbus feels that he has to tackle the inescapable question: why did the Norsemen not colonize these parts of North America which they had discovered, as Columbus would subsequently in South America? If I, without an in-depth study of the case, had to guess an answer, I would just, offer a very, very basic one. Well, maybe their mothers taught them, like mine taught me, not to take what wasn't mine. Yeah? But a historian of Erikson's adventure knows that will not do. The answer, Helge Ingstad says, is simple enough, I quote: Columbus had firearms. He was absolutely superior to the natives in battle. Moreover, he was in constant contact with Europe. The Norsemen, on the other hand, had the same kind of weapons as the natives, little more than bows and arrows and spears, and they were greatly outnumbered by the Indians and Eskimos. Their contact with Greenland was slight indeed. Concluding that Erikson's discovery came just, and I quote, too early. As the Chinese reticence to expand their dominions across the seas, one may find an explanation that ascribes it to ill-guided foreign policy associated with narrow-minded leadership and resulting in a missed opportunity. We thus read that, and I quote, the same resurgence of ethnocentrism and anti-foreign feeling that led to the closing of the Chinese domains to European travelers led likewise to a succession of China's own overseas adventures. By 1498, the main rulers had long since opted out of a growing hegemony over Indian Ocean ports and trade routes. The imperial court putting an end to maritime exploration with the result that, I quote, a centralized decision made in Beijing stopped the whole civilization from venturing and exploring, end of quote. Such formulations, of course, I think I'm going to run forward. Yeah? Should I finish the Chinese prelude or interlude? Okay. I think you might like it. So, such formulations, of course, would seem to insinuate the conviction that if you have power and do not use it to expand your confines, you somehow disobey the dictates of history, even though we know that expanding one's confines often entails causing those of others to shrink. And this, of course, again, the Columbian legacy. At any rate, whatever China may have done with its knowledge and creativity to support overseas exploration and the spreading of Chinese settlements in regions then unknown to European navigators, as Gavin Menzies has sought to show in 1421, the year when China discovered America, or to build the Great Wall to reduce the chances of contact with alien peoples, the historical record leaves little room for doubting that the Chinese do not lack cultural, scientific, or intellectual sources of their own to draw from in charting a path for development and advancement. The Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano has captured the extraordinary inventiveness of Chinese society by listing many of the technologies that today we regard as features of advanced civilization, while seldom remembering that those innovations first saw the light in China long before they traveled to Europe. Galeano quotes many of these early accomplishments in a vignette from his book Mirrors, Stories of Almost Everyone, that suggestively carries an interrogative title, what did the Chinese not invent? I will just mention a few. I think I'm going to, when I publish this, I'm going to have trouble with the publisher because I want to quote it in total, and they don't let you do that. You have to pay publisher stuff. When I was a child, I knew China as a country on the other side of the world from Uruguay. You could get there if you had the patience to dig a hole deep enough. Later on, I learned something about world history. But world history was the history of Europe, and it remains so today. The rest of the world, the rest of the world lay and still lies in darkness. China too. We know little or nothing of the past of the country that invented practically everything. Silk began there 5,000 years ago. Before anyone else, the Chinese discovered, named, and cultivated tea. They were the first to mine salt from below ground and the first to use gas and oil in their stoves and lamps. They made lightweight iron plows and machines for planting, threshing, and harvesting 2,000 years before the English mechanized their agriculture. They invented the compass 1,100 years before Europe's ships began to use them. 1,000 years before the Germans, they discovered that water-driven mills could power their iron and steel foundries. 1,900 years ago, they invented paper. They printed books 6 centuries before Gutenberg. And 2 centuries before him, they used mobile type in their printing presses. 1,200 years ago, they invented gunpowder, and a century later, the cannon. 900 years ago, they made silk weaving machines with bobbins worked by pedals, which the Italians copied after a 2-century delay. They also invented the rudder, spinning wheel, acupuncture, porcelain, soccer, playing cards, the magic lantern, fireworks, the pinwheel, paper money, the mechanical clock, the seismograph, lacquer, phosphorescent paint, the fishing reel, the suspension bridge, the wheelbarrow, the umbrella, the fan, the stirrup, the horseshoe, the key, the toothbrush, and other things hardly worth mentioning, end of quote. Now, if the Chinese, with that history, could be reduced to an area where no knowledge can be found, imagine blacks. Imagine the people associated with Africa or the African diaspora. And there was something that happened in what I like to call the Columbian. Well, let me just say very quickly, in case I run out of time, in case I get that sound from my colleague. Just think of the least racist historians, say the first part of the 20th century. Arnold Toynbee, for instance. Yeah, Arnold Toynbee, who has a whole section of his study of history, in which he disputes the validity of race as a category for understanding advancement. Yeah? At the level of conceptual paradigms, he is not a racist. But he too is the heir to a nullification of African knowledge, to the point that he lists, he does not include Africa as one of the regions that have produced civilizations. Yeah, great civilizations. So he lists, I think there are 13. Africa does not make it there. And Will Durand, who also has a whole section on how race cannot be used, yeah, to explain human phenomena, human development, achievement, and so on and so forth, again tries to offer an environmental, explanation for why there was no cultural civilization in Africa. Yeah? So they are not racist, but they don't have the knowledge available to them that would enable them to put some meat in that anti-racism. Yeah? So they end up repeating, so they lack that knowledge. And so when the knowledge appears, it becomes shocking. Like, for instance, when you go to Great Zimbabwe at the end of the 19th century, and the ruins of Mashona land are discovered, and explorers are just totally impressed, with the development, the intelligence, the sophistication that those ruins sort of reflected, that it had to be a very highly developed civilization that put these edifices together. And so automatically, the understanding is that the people who built them must have come from elsewhere. Yeah? And they actually, and so there's a famous J. Theodore Bent, who wrote a book entitled The Ruined Cities of Mashonaland, being a record of excavation and exploration in 1891. The book is published in London in 1892, and it's basically it's a demonstration of all that was found in that region, where evidence of the most sophisticated kind of development as understood by Europe at the time, right, is available. And then the effort to find burial grounds, yeah, that would help them identify the people who came to build those structures in this area. Yeah? So you have there even the facts interfered with by a preconception of the incapacity of black Africans to produce civilization. Yeah? So the study, I have a passage that I would like to find very quickly, because it is one that sort of tells, without my having to go into serious detail, tells the story of how it's the blurb by Emmanuel Wallerstein to the book by Basil Davidson called The Lost Cities of Africa, which I believe was published first in 1954 and then reissued in the 70s. The blurb by Wallerstein comes from he wrote it when he was still at Columbian University. And what he says there, that this effort on the part of Davidson reflects the almost religious dedication of this scholar for so many years to try to show something to Europe and the United States that the societies were not yet able to see. Yeah? The idea of reconfiguring the understanding of the African past. Yeah? And I believe that that understanding of the African past is still with us. Fine. Oh, I still have some. I thought you were going to be much cooler than that. So what I'd like to say then, in my 5 minutes, as much as I can fit in, is that something happened with the arrival of Columbus and the other dudes in the Americas. Yeah, something fundamental happened. Yeah, it wasn't just the takeover of the lands, the theft of things, right? It was a redefinition of humanity that happened there, which had to do with a new ethos of domination. Yeah? Conquest in the ancient world was admittedly good for the conqueror, yielding material resources, land, human subjects, and worldly possessions galore that increased by leaps and bounds the conqueror's dominions and prestige. The structure of domination then in place bespoke a certain simplicity and frankness that enabled the conqueror to seek mastery of other people's wealth, territories, and power without having to weave complex dogmas of justification. Ancient masters did not attempt to pass themselves for evangelists. It would not have occurred to them to construe their attacks against neighboring villages or distant empires as acts of kindness toward their victims. When occupying a coveted country, sacking its towns, plundering its comforts, and subjugating its inhabitants, they did not claim to fulfill a divinely ordained outcome of history that would ultimately culminate in the good of the entire species. Nor did they ascribe to themselves a special anointment that made them deserving of what others had, or to reduce the human value of others so as to make them unworthy of the possessions they owned. They did not think of themselves as morally superior to those whom they vanquished, and they certainly did not believe that their victory had anything to do with their harboring greater decency in their hearts than their foes. On the contrary, they boasted their greater capacity for violence, their firmer might, and their hardened hearts in the fields of battle.
They took pride in the effectiveness of their weapons, the assiduity of their training, the tenacity of their warriors, and their overall disposition to kill. They attributed their victories to concrete factors such as armament, military prowess, strategy, and favorable circumstances, not to the quality of their genes or the purity of their souls. When they won, they thanked the gods because they knew that the wheel of fortune could always turn on them. Yeah? They knew that there was nothing so singularly special about them as to guarantee that fortune would unfailingly stay on their side. They recognized violence, plunder, and pillage as a way to get ahead in the world. They understood the bestiality of their condition and the barbarity of war. They did not attempt to ennoble the atrocities they committed against others or to minimize the pain they inflicted. Given us self-awareness, they lacked the incentive either to demonize their foes exceedingly or unduly aggrandize themselves. They knew they shared the brutality of their enemies when it came to the business of killing. The soldiers of Alexander, Xerxes, Kublai Khan, Exana, would probably have failed to fathom the feeling of horror expressed by U.S. public officials and social commentators following the incidents revealed in 2004, where the invading forces were found to be doing horrible things in the Abu Ghraib area. Yeah? The ancients did their killing and maiming unabashedly, often quite boastfully. In the world of the ancient Hebrews, killing would stand out as a mark of greater prestige. The scriptures evoke the superior might ascribed to David over his mentor King Saul by means of a refrain that reads like a paean to mass destruction. Saul kills by the thousands, David by the tens of thousands. The frankness of ancient violence left little room for moral subterfuge, as the perpetrator generally regarded the victory itself as justification of warfare. At the same time, and then I go down. So imagine this: the Roman-based Greek historian Plutarch reports that Philip, aware of Aristotle's status as the most famous and learned of philosophers, sent for him in Stagira to entrust him with the education of his son Alexander for a noble and appropriate tuition fee. Prior to his, he taught for hire. Prior to his relationship with Aristotle, Philip had destroyed Stagira, but now with this enhanced rapport with the city, he had it rebuilt and restored to those of its citizens who were in exile or in slavery, suggesting that his enmity toward the Stagirites was negotiable in the face of changed circumstances. There was nothing essential to it. When Alexander replaced his father in the throne of Macedonia, he also appears to have upheld the view of war as a circumstantial affair. Witness Alexander's most memorable clash with the Persian army led by Darius. Alexander's Greek army defeats the Persian forces. At the end of the battle, when the generals from the victorious side inspect the battlefield, they find that Darius' mother, wife, and two unmarried daughters figure among the captives. When Alexander hears a report of this outcome, including details of the Persian women's anguish as they cry inconsolably, bewailing over the presumed death of Darius, he quickly takes steps to put them at ease, assuring them that during their captivity they will continue to enjoy respect and honors befitting their station. As to the fortune of their relative, meaning Darius, Alexander soothed them with the news that he escaped unscathed, adding further that he harbored no ill will toward Darius, and that he made war against him purely for supremacy. Another episode, and then there's also the encounter with Porus. But I want to get to the end of book 24 of the Iliad, where you have that encounter between King Priam and the bad dude, Achilles, right? And what is that about, right? It's an encounter. Priam has managed to get to the Achaean camp somehow, undisturbed by the enemy forces. He was entering the enemy camp. He gets there, somehow goes to Achilles, and Achilles is, after he identifies who he is, Achilles sits him down and gives him something to drink, I don't know if they did coffee at the time, you know. But they're talking, and he says, Achilles looks at him, and he recognizes his father in Prime. He says, yeah, man, we've killed all of your sons and stuff, and I'm thinking, looking at you, and look at, and you remind me of my father. He's away, and prophecy says that I will never see him again, right? Because remember, he's supposed to die before getting back home, yeah. And so he actually begins a conversation in which they are both musing over the tragedy of their condition, yeah. No sense that I am Greek and you are Trojan, and therefore, this was meant to be, right? Or that somehow I deserve this better, or that somehow you don't deserve to, or somehow the grief of the loss of your children is any greater than, my father's grief for the loss of his son, me, And there's that there. I believe that disappears after 1492. The possibility for that kind of empathy with the enemy disappears in 1492, because something happens. And again, let me give you an example. The other example, you have me on the last minute, yeah. Let me give you the other example that I also wanted to share, which is the example of Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan was the greatest thing there was, right? Marco Polo comes back and says, you cannot. There's no words to describe how powerful that guy is, yeah. And the expansion of his domains and so on and so forth. But Kublai Khan finds that there's a village within his vast domains where people have been engaging in gambling. And so, oh yeah, they're doing that? I have a problem with that. So he goes there and he addresses them. He says, I subdued you through the power of my sword. Everything you have, therefore, is by right mine. When you gamble, you're messing with my money. Yeah? So stop doing that. Now notice the emphasis on subdues you through the power of my sword. Yeah? Not through the power of having a greater God who understands history better and knows that it should be me, not you, to be leading the narrative of humanity. Yeah? And that, I think, is something that gets lost. The moment you begin following the debates with Bartolomé de las Casas, where people where people engage in this discussion about the humanity of the Indians, yeah. In ancient domination, there was no need to question, to challenge the humanity of those whom you wished or had succeeded at subjecting. Yeah? And I believe there's a fundamental difference. And I would say that there is a direct impact between that change, that turn in history, in relations, in the valuing of us with respect to the others. Yeah? That is fundamental to the study of literature and culture. Yeah? I believe that how we view knowledge worth knowing, yeah, how we view excellence, how we view literary achievement, cultural achievement, all of that is informed by a logic that was put in place beginning in 1492, and that we have not done enough of a job to eradicate the logic and to change it for a more humane, inclusive one. And every time you get a Roberto González Echeverría, or a Sergio Micheli, objecting to your finding ugly things in the text, or demanding that an analysis be first subtle before being truthful. Yeah, basically what you have is a resistance to change the initial logic. Yeah. So I think I'll stop there and subject myself to your inquiries. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes of questions, Silvia, so go for it.
Is it a few minutes because I went over?
No.
Okay. When there are no questions, it's very clear. Everyone understood perfectly and agreed, and there's no reason to have a conversation.
Okay, Stuart has a question.
Well, it's not so much a question. It's
Comment.
I was struck by the first part of your paper when you were talking about the response to your analysis of the essay or the work by the Dominican scholar.
Pedro.
Yeah, I don't know that work, but it reminded me very much of Chinua Achebe's story about reading Heart of Darkness and being confronted by scholars in America particularly who were outraged that he should see Heart of Darkness as a racist text and unable to see where he could see the racism, even though they had read and taught and retaught that text over time. And partly what they couldn't see was what they were themselves bringing to their own reading of the text. So I see the force of your presentation, but I do think it's in some ways dangerous in that it seems to me to romanticize the rest of the history of the rest of the world in a sense. I mean, I'm in the Department of African Studies. I know very well the way Africa has been represented over time, although in the last 100 years there's been a lot that's counterbalanced or gone towards counterbalancing that view, that prevailing racist view. But the idea somehow that the evil of colonialism or the ideas that underpin the kind of colonialism that Columbus brings into the world, as it were, belong to Europe or belong to whiteness, seems to me particularly problematic given what we know about the actual history of Africa. That the history of Africa is like the history of everywhere else. It's strong people exploiting weak people. As you said, using the example of the classical times, but you can use the examples of more recent times in Africa, that the strong exploit the weak. They take advantage. They don't necessarily try to convert the weak into thinking that they deserve to be weak, but they turn people into slaves, and by turning people into slaves, you are almost by definition saying the slave owners are superior to the enslaved, regardless of the skin colour of the people involved.
Would you let me disagree a bit?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't
Yeah,
mean
I actually think that when you said all I want to propose is captured in that little aside when you said they take advantage of the weak and so on and so forth. They don't, try to make it, there's not so much investment in trying to inferiorize that. And I believe that that's the difference. Well, I actually don't think I deserve the qualification of romanticizing, because I'm not saying that Kubla Khan was a good guy,
No.
or that Alexander was a good guy. Yeah. What I'm saying is that they did not have among their tools of domination, they did not have the discourse, the ideology of inferiorization, which would be deployed systematically, by the West in its colonial project, right? And let me add, and what disturbs me the most is not that those things happened, meaning millennia, hundreds of years ago, right? But that we still are the heirs of the of the legacy, and I believe that the legacy is still it still comes up when every time you are in a faculty, in a search committee in a department, and you see how knowledges are evaluated and how particular kinds of training are tainted with particular weaknesses. Like, for instance, in my department, the person we are hiring for a 19th century American literature specialist, right? If the person wrote the dissertation on, say, a Chinese writer from the from the Southwest, the 19th century, or on Maria Amparo Ruiz de Burton, right, who wrote her novels in the 1880s, automatically there's a doubt as to whether a person will be able to do Whitman or Melville.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah, I understand that.
And I believe that is connected to that. It is connected. It comes up every time. It comes up. But there was another thing. So basically, I do not mean to say that ancient domination was better. But ancient domination, you could be, say, Publius Terentius Afer, whom you know very well, right? You could be Publius Terentius Afer and be a slave. Yeah? The master, gives you breaks, and you cultivate your learning, right? There was no association, no rigid association between skin color and intellect. Yeah? Or with slavery and intellect. I mean, I was reading Tacitus over the last years. There are slaves all over, participating at very at sensitive points of the public sphere, including conspiracies against the emperor. Yeah, because it was just a condition. So Publius Terentius Afer, I don't recall that detail. I don't recall that he was ever granted his freedom. No. I have to look that up. Yeah. But he could go and become the most important, Roman playwright that we know. And you go back and they say, oh, he was a slave. And he was African.
I know he was an exception. I mean, that's the thing. That it's the exception that makes the difference.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Steve,
thanks, Robert. You paint a picture of exclusively male intellectuals and historians speculating it is among themselves. And I wonder whether you could say a bit about the extent to which those racial ideologies are or are not circulated among other constituencies, either the public at large, policymakers, and so forth. Or is this essentially what intellectual racism is, a form of writing by and for a closed homosocial shop?
I would tend to lean towards the latter, and I can tell you in the Dominican case, I could tell you in the Dominican case, the famous anti-Haitianism in Dominican society is strictly sustained by the ruling classes. Yeah, when you go to the border, when you go to the border regions, people are hanging out across the border and doing things. As a matter of fact, the anti-Haitian violence of the Dominican state is the result of that intermingling that happens. For Trujillo, it was very clear that this was a nationalizing project. Yeah? To cut that thing, and Pedro Enrique Sureña, sorry, my compatriot, Pedro Enrique Sureña, whom I love, by the way, just like Stuart loves Brathwaite, and we were saying, some questioning things about Brathwaite. But Pedro Enrique Sureña thought that the government needed to commit itself. Pedro Enrique Sureña served the Trujillo regime for a year and a half, 1931, 32, 33. And he thought that the Dominican government had to commit itself had to invest in bringing pianos to all the border towns, and sort of basically it's a way of inducing a kind of leaning towards the European musical forms, right? And because of what he saw there, that scared him, a kind of indistinguishableness between the Dominicans and the Haitians at the border. Yeah, so I would definitely agree with you. And if you go to Lydia Maria Childs in the United States, you have many of the women, white women, sort of leading the men in their abolitionist thinking. And you also have black women. You also have black women who are doing the job, although probably often they appear as in collaboration with white women, as a result of the need for literacy and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay, we have time for one more intervention. Yes, Frank.
I think there's a fascinating talk, and I'm scared I'm going to ask a question that's just going to demand another lecture, really. But I'm just wondering what you think were the triggers for that change, because it's all very well saying 1492, but clearly the things are actually happening over quite a long period of time. I get the sense from some of the things you said at the beginning of the talk that somehow or other you think that possibly the church, Christianity, somehow or other is
Did I say that?
well, no, you didn't say it, but I you know.
My God, or okay, no, but I think what I would conjecture from the start is that the interiorization of others is a factor of Christian piety. Yeah, it is a factor of Christian piety. The Kubla Khan didn't have a God, to whom he had to respond for all the enslavement and the killing. His God, probably as he imagined it, will probably say, "Well done, kid." But if you come from a creed, from a faith that says that we are all the children of God, right? And then you have commandments and stuff that discourage you from killing, and from taking stuff from other people. Theft is a bad thing in Christianity, especially in the New Testament, right? Christianity is the New Testament. Actually, no. Christianity comes after, and it's all deformed. But okay. So yeah, it's the need to resolve the contradiction, the moral contradiction. And I think you see it when you get Ginés de Sepúlveda actually going back to Aristotle and finding the politics, finding the politics of Aristotle, a passage where where Aristotle speaks of the slave and sort of ascribes a condition of a role to each member of the household. Yeah, of course, in the politics, the slave is a factor of the household. Yeah, it's not this alien, inimical being that we need to maintain in continuous and uninterrupted subjection or else, right? It's something, the way you could just be. I mean, it was a social. My view is that the slavery was a social rank that you had, and that was it. You could even be somebody great, like Terence, but if nobody ever thought of giving you your freedom, you stay a slave and then go into history. And so I began thinking about this, Stuart, when I saw that Mayor Dinkins was elected in New York City as the mayor, right? First black mayor. And then there was this huge celebration. Harry Belafonte was part of the inauguration and all, and so on and so forth, very distinguished at the time, no longer doing the banana thing. And it was amazing to see the emphasis on this firstness. Yeah? And I was struck, and I said, oh, wait a minute. When was emancipation? When was the Emancipation Declaration? Right? That's 1865, 63. And you mean to tell me that almost 200 or 150 years later, we still find it unfathomable, that a black person could merit and receive, right, the responsibility of leading the city. So to me, that's why I became a literary person who cannot do anything without history. Yeah, I'm sorry for the for the formalists in the the people who say, or the professor who says, the professor who told me, I don't like you, when I was proposing my dissertation, says a work of art comes fixed with its own internal user's guide. So I don't believe that. I think you need to help it out with history. Yeah, and so if I actually, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just bothers me that some colleagues don't know that when when they are challenging, when they are doubting the intelligence of a person who specializes in 19th century, Chinese American literature, the intelligence to do Melville, right, or to do Whitman, right, that they don't see that they are part of a long history, in which that same thing has been said in different ways and at different levels of aggression or aggressiveness, right, from the debates in with Ginés de Sepúlveda,
Well,
No. We have
Sorry.
to.
Sorry, which do you feel will have a more integral role in overcoming the Columbian legacy? Marxist class struggle or 1960s racial theory?
Which? Okay, I didn't hear the first part.
Which do you feel will have a more integral role in overcoming the Columbian legacy? 19th century Marxist theory or 1960s racial struggles and civil rights?
I believe the latter. Yeah, I believe the academy has been. The academy always follows things that happen on the streets. That's how I understand it. It was the people taking to the streets in the United States during the 1960s, right, and being attacked by police and the water hoses and all of that. That is those are the builders of ethnic studies program throughout the United States. Yeah, it was not the write a proposal, Stewart, write a proposal. I think we need like the provost. We need to know about other people. We need rather we need to know about our own diversity, because remember the difference was never a problem in the academy when the difference came from a culture elsewhere. Yeah? So the study of China in the United States was never an issue. The study of Africa in the United States was never an issue. But to tell some colleagues in the 1950s that the syllabus could or should also include black writers from the United States in this introduction to American literature, that was a stretch. Yeah. So I believe that it is, again, I am here identifying my own background. I think things happen on the streets first, or whatever the equivalent of the streets are for today, right? Because we know that social movements also evolve. Yeah. So I don't know if today, I don't know. I have to think more about whether or not the social networks have actually taken the place that the streets used to have in advancing social agendas of social change. I have to think some more. I see too many people repeating it very quickly, but I want to think some more. Just to see. What do you think, Stuart?
Okay, I tell you what, he's going to tell you that in the foyer of the Ashley building, where we're going to have a reception, get you some wine, and thank you for your presentation. But anyway, it was wonderful. Thanks a lot for coming.